Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Whether you're tuning in from the Great American Bash or halfway around the world, we've got a jam-packed episode for you. Get ready to dive into wrestling's rich history, packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises. And remember, you can skip to your favorite moments with our chapter markers. Let's jump right into it. September 11, 2000 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. WCW and ECW Uncertainty, All Japan New Japan Feud. By Dave Meltzer. The pro wrestling industry in both the United States and Japan has never been in a more tumultuous period than it currently faces, with only two companies, at least as it stands right now, having anything that could be close to regarded as rosy long-term futures. The lack of substantial news as the new TV season is about to start makes the future of the US scene, aside from the WWF, speculative in some cases, to a scary degree. The WWF, which has been on fire for some time, if anything, looks to get stronger with the return to TV of Steve Austin in a few weeks, and as it gets stronger and increases its market share, it makes it that much more difficult for others to survive in that market, and the others aren't making money at it now. In a business as rapidly changing and faddish as this one, predicting long-term is impossible, but there are no signs of WWF falling from its current level. Even if the company started to falter, they are economically on such sound, strong ground that it would take a WCW-like freefall, and unlike in 1998 when WCW was at its peak but the signs of a decline if things weren't changed were everywhere, WWF doesn't show signs of anything that would lead one to believe that was imminent. The rest of the American scene, at least at the major league level, really at this point consists of WCW and ECW. WCW is in the midst of severe economic cutbacks, and there are no signs anywhere of a business turnaround. Among the cost-cutting measures this past week included no opening pyro on Nitro, as well as more than a dozen wrestlers who had their hotel room paid by the company were told that since it wasn't specified in their contracts but had it on a verbal agreement, in most cases with Eric Bischoff, as opposed to those who had it actually written into their contracts, that they were going to have to pay for their own rooms on the road. Bischoff came to Atlanta on August 29 for a meeting with Brad Siegel, with the irony being that since he flew in from Phoenix, and the crew had worked Tucson the previous night and were making flight connections to Atlanta through Phoenix, Bischoff was on the same flight with many of the crew members based in Atlanta. From sources very close to the situation, the meeting was about purchasing the company. Bischoff himself denied that was what the meeting was about, but within the company it is being openly talked about that being the case. The public face is similar to WCW, as a company continually denying the company is up for sale when it is well known they have had talks with several companies in recent months about that very thing. Bischoff is interested in being in charge without people above him with the power to overrule him or to bog down or slow down finalizations of his new business ideas. Those in the company claim that Siegel, the day after the Bischoff meeting, said that they are entertaining many offers for the company, but none of them at this point are even remotely close when it comes to money. Reports from earlier this year, when the talks with SFX were hot, were that the two sides were far apart when it came to belief in what the fair purchase price of WCW should be. With the flood of employees in the front office putting in for transfers to other Turner divisions so they can remain with the Turner Company over the past few months, the word on the inside for months has been that the company is on the blocks. The longer things continue with the cutbacks everywhere and no changes for the better in income level, the more the uncertainty grows, the level of which for the major league wrestlers in both ECW and WCW these days is very close to the highest level it's ever been. Any possible Fox deal isn't going to be taking place this season, and likely won't unless it is spearheaded by Hulk Hogan, which already hurts its long-term chances because starting a company in 2001 built around Hogan and Randy Savage isn't the answer. It couldn't start until Hogan's WCW contract expires, which may explain the current lawsuit, as well as perhaps a way for Hogan to simply be released early as part of a settlement provision. Like in today's Japan, there is always the interpromotional idea, which WCW has at many times indicated it wants to do with ECW. If ECW ever does it, it will be the sign that the company knows it has exhausted every means possible of surviving. In WCW, the uncertainty and nervousness about the future, which for employees and wrestlers means the lifestyle, the job, and everything, has never been greater. ECW's crew for the most part has been through it already, during the period for much of 1999 when many checks were bounced and it was clear the company was running deeply in debt and couldn't survive. TNN was the company's life preserver, both for morale and survival. But ultimately, that failed. The ratings were a big disappointment from the start, with the network predicting a 2.0 average for the season and ending up with less than half that. And worse, over a one-year period, with little blips up and down, they largely stayed stagnant. The product itself had its spectacular moments, most notably the Masato Tanaka vs. Mike Awesome title program, but overall was stagnant most of the year as well, victimized by a consistent exodus of top stars to the other two groups, giving it the public perception of a hard-working minor league as opposed to a third major league organization. And in hindsight, the short-term working agreement with WWF, because of how the company and its title were portrayed, appears to have been a short-term negative, since it led to the biggest ratings dip of the year that the company in recent weeks has finally rebounded from. There is promise if the TV situation is straightened out with a slew of young stars who can provide action that are getting over to at least the core audience. TNN has faced the brunt of the blame, and probably deserves some of it. Certainly at this point the question can be asked as to when TNN started negotiating with WWF, and at that point it was clear ECW was only going to survive on the station if the WWF deal fell through, and considering the lengths Viacom went to get the deal, they were certainly working with the idea it wouldn't. However, ECW's business overall didn't grow even with the new exposure to a profitable level. For all the talk of lack of promotion, television stations historically until the past 5 years have never promoted their wrestling shows, which also traditionally have done some incredible numbers in many markets with no promotion. Whether ECW is in a more precarious position than WCW is a debatable subject, as if ECW gets a deal with the USA Network with substantial weekly rights fees to fund the promotion, it can both survive and thrive over the next year, because its survival costs are so much lower than that of WCW. WCW will survive if a major conglomerate continues to pump money in, but there are no signs of its ability to thrive on the horizon. But without a TV deal with a network that includes strong enough profitability on the TV to make up for the debt the company has incurred and to cover the weekly payroll, ECW may be in even more trouble than WCW. ECW has come to this wire before and survived, and the odds still seem to be that USA Network won't win its appeal to keep WWF programming, a legal decision that won't hurt WWF at all, but may prove nothing short of fatal ultimately for ECW. But it should be noted that nobody seems to expect USA to ultimately win in court, and that ECW is a good bet for at least a fringe time slot tryout on USA, which gives at least another year. That survival would be based on drawing a competitive rating, and while the much rumored 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Saturday night time slot is hardly prime time, pro wrestling, even though both WCW and ECW companies may be cold right now from a pay-per-view standpoint, and neither is consistently drawing well, unless you judge their TV ratings against WWF juggernaut, or in the case of WCW, against their own history. Both groups still draw numbers much higher than the vast majority of programming on the networks they are on. From a TV standpoint, while pro wrestling may have peaked a year ago, in a market with so many stations desperate for anything to draw an audience, both WCW and ECW can still be valuable television commodities, which is the only key to the survival of both. In Japan, for the short term, the All Japan vs. New Japan feud should and will pop business for both companies. Still, history has shown that companies that enter into this agreement with New Japan, which ultimately occurs as a last ditch for survival, in the long run don't make it, as the famed UWFI feud showed. Pro Wrestling Noah right now is also a hot ticket as a novelty, and pride seems very strong. But of the four, only New Japan looks from this vantage point to have long-term stability, and even that company on its own is suffering from what up to this point has been the most boring year for the promotion in recent memory. All Japan, after this angle runs its course, has its questions, particularly after losing its television and most of its wrestlers, as its perception as an underdog company right now trying to survive will only take them so far. Noah, once the novelty of the new group runs its course, needs to create new stars for survival, because the old guard thrived and later survived in presenting great matches, and the bodies are banged up badly from that, and the matches are neither new, nor can they match up to the memory of what those matches once were. With wrestling being even more a part of the future of cable in that country, what with already having a 24-hour fighting channel which concentrates on wrestling along with MMA, boxing and martial arts, its value as TV programming over the long term will down the road be similar to what it is today in the US. Pride is a hot ticket right now, but history has shown it is far more difficult in the long run to book a shoot organization than a worked organization for all the obvious reasons. Just 5 years ago, UFC was rivaling WWF and head of WCW on pay-per-view. Now it's hanging on to existence, and while politics has a lot to do with it, the difficulty of booking a shoot sport had already started taking a chunk out of the UFC by rates before the political problems did the major damage. The main difference, of course, is that it is easier to create storylines and tons easier to keep them fresh and alive. Also, a worked match is inherently more entertaining to the general public because it can be formatted specifically for that purpose. It's also harder to market superstars, because in a worked organization they can be booked and protected and made larger than life. In a shoot organization, the reality is that even the greatest of fighters are mere humans, and get hurt and have a shorter shelf life as top fighters than a shelf life of a box office attraction, which affects their performances, and when facing top competition, are going to get beat. Unless you have a once-in-a-lifetime Superman like Karelin, or you book stars against nobodies who are tomato cans like they do in boxing, which is dying in the US except for the occasional major pay-per-view marquee matchup, and to the over 50 audience, the superstars are going to show weakness. They'll be knocked out, or they'll tap, and unlike whenever The Rock has to lay down for 3, a finish can't be booked to protect him, such as having outside interference, a foreign object, or a biased referee as the scapegoat. This happening once or twice makes the superstar become far too human and far less of a novelty to sell out dome stadiums. The All Japan promotion, which was practically being given its last rites when nearly all its talent quit, has now been saved and has great short-term business prospects with the opening of the feud with New Japan. The first matchup between the two companies in more than 10 years drew a sellout crowd of 16,300 to Tokyo Budokan Hall on September 2, and that was drawn with a Masahiro Chono vs. Masa Fuchi match, a match featuring New Japan's biggest full-time draw against an aged wrestler who hasn't been in a serious program in years. The feud should peak on October 9 for the New Japan Tokyo Dome show, which, with a main event of Toshiaki Kawada vs. Kensuke Sasaki strongly rumored, the official main event announcement is expected to come later this week, and the latest word we had is that they want to make the first meeting a non-title match, since the feeling is it doesn't need the IWGP title at stake to draw a sellout, and many feel New Japan must break from its tradition, which is to put itself over in the famous first meeting, since historically that's the one everyone remembers, because for the longevity of the feud, Kawada probably needs to go over, is also expected to draw a sellout the first at the Dome except for the traditional Jan. 4th shows every year, since the Antonio Inoki retirement show more than 2 years ago. The way the angle is going, Kawada challenged New Japan's top guy for a battle over who is really the top guy. Sasaki, as IWGP champ and G1 Climax winner, claims he's the top guy, while Chono is claiming that everyone knows he's really the top guy. It was described as one of those magic moments. Team 2000 members Tatsutoshi Goto, Hiro Saito, Satoshi Kojima and Hiroyoshi Tenzan came out to sit in ringside seats before Chono's music started. The place went nuts for Chono, with fans both booing him and chanting his name. The match itself was described as superheated, and better than would be expected considering Fuchi is 46 and is long past his prime, while Chono's prime was cut short by numerous injuries. Chono did the SDF and Fuchi made the ropes. When the Team 2000 members got out of their chairs and Tenzan started yelling at Fuchi, the place started booing the New Japan wrestlers heavily. Fuchi got a strong near fall after 2 back suplexes. He went for a third, but Chono gave him a low kick, followed by a Yakuza kick for the pin in 1653. Chono then celebrated in the ring with Team 2000, with Chono saying that Team 2000 was stronger than All Japan. In an effort to use this feud to get Taiyo Kiya, Manukia Mossman, over as a main event star, it was he who hit the ring during the celebration and had to be restrained from going after Team 2000. After the main event on the show, where Stan Hansen and Genichiro Tenryu beat Steve Williams and Toshiaki Kawada, Kawada said that since Fuchi lost, he would have to go to New Japan and ask the All Japan fans to support him and cheer for the All Japan wrestlers at New Japan shows. On September 4th, Chono appeared as a guest on TV Asahi's Tonight Show, which is the Japanese equivalent of its US namesake. The show aired approximately 5 minutes of footage of the Fuchi match. Since All Japan itself has no network television, it's unclear whether more of the match will air on September 9th on the regular New Japan TV show, but it would certainly make a lot more sense to air this match than to air the Ryan Gracie match like they did on September 2nd. The day of the Budokan show, there was a Tokyo Sports front page story stating that Motoko Baba was against TV Asahi cameras being allowed into Budokan, but on the surface, that makes little sense because the TV coverage was needed to get the feud stronger. Baba herself appeared in a clip on the show saying she welcomed the feud and opening the doors. The next step of the angle will be on September 16th in Nagoya for a New Japan TV taping where Fuchi and Taiyo Kiya will face Chono and Goto in a tag team match, and Kawada will attend the show to shoot an angle. Chono has claimed as part of the angle that he's going to recruit Kiya into Team 2000 and steal him from All Japan, right in front of Fuchi, and that he would never go to an All Japan show again, saying he didn't want to breathe the same air as those fans. On the tag team front, Kojima and Tenzan issued a challenge to defend their IWGP tag team titles against Hansen and Williams. Williams responded by saying he didn't want to team with Hansen and first wanted to win All Japan's tag team titles with a mystery partner so that each group's tag team champions would face off. All Japan and New Japan were both formed in 1972. The companies worked together first in 1978 for one show at Budokan Hall headlined by each company's top Japanese stars against two of the country's top heels, with Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki beating Abdullah the Butcher, then with All Japan, and Tiger Jeet Singh, then with New Japan. This show was during the post-Ali Inoki period where business was down, and it took a show of that magnitude, bringing together the three major companies in existence in Japan at that time through the auspices of Tokyo Sports, just to sell out Budokan. The doors were again closed until 1990 when, after Ric Flair was pulled off a Tokyo Dome main event against Keiji Muto, New Japan went to All Japan, and with two interpromotional matches, both won by All Japan, Jumbo Tsuruta and Yoshiaki Yatsu of All Japan beating Kengo Kimura and Osamu Kido of New Japan, and Genichiro Tenryu and Tiger Mask Misawa of All Japan beating Riki Choshu and George Takano. It drew New Japan's first ever Tokyo Dome sellout, and a then all-time record $3.2 million live gate. The companies worked a little together for a few more months in 1990, including a show combined with the WWF, which left bitter feelings on all sides, since it ended up with All Japan and WWF having numerous disagreements and New Japan backing out and only allowing its wrestlers to face each other to try and steal the show. After that show, Baba went back into his isolationist promoter mode until opening the doors in recent years to some indie wrestlers. No singles dream matches of the native stars came out of the time period, but there was an interpromotional program with Stan Hansen of All Japan against Big Van Vader of New Japan, who had a couple of matches ending with double DQ finishes, before the companies went their separate ways for another decade. While All Japan needed this feud for survival, New Japan needed it almost as badly, because its place as one of the big two sports entertainment group in Japan was threatened by the recent success of Pride running big stadiums, and by the huge television success of K1, which may realistically be number one in Japan right now, as well as competing with both groups as the top attraction in the new pay-per-view marketplace. The August 27th Dream Stage Entertainment show from the Seibu Dome, which airs on American pay-per-view on the Dish Network on September 8th, was an interesting blend of the world of pro wrestling mixed in with less controllable reality. Make no mistake about the show, virtually everything on the show except what happened bell to bell was a cross between the K1 pageantry, ring entrances and fancy production, which was spawned by pro wrestling, and what would be considered to Japanese as old-style pro wrestling angles, which should also be no surprise with Antonio Inoki involved as a producer of the show. This will be the third DSE show on pay-per-view, albeit to a terribly limited market. The first, the finals of their World Heavyweight title tournament, was an excellent show and drew an encouraging buy rate in North America to build from. The second show was largely forgettable, and seemed to have little appeal. This third show had both good and bad points. For serious fans of MMA, it's a show they'd probably want to see because there are enough big names involved, and the gods were on their side with a lot of spectacular finishes. But I'd stop short from saying it's a must-see show. What was a positive for the Japanese market is that the big crowd, which means tons of casual fans, reacted to almost every fighter as if they were someone important and knew them, and not just to the pro wrestlers, which is good for company longevity. This week's Weekly Gong had the first 20 pages of the magazine devoted to the Pride show, showing its appeal to the pro wrestling audience, with most of the emphasis on Ishizawa versus Ryan Gracie, full cover photo as well as first 7 pages, to show that to the wrestling fans, that was actually the biggest deal on the show. Fujita versus Shamrock got 5 pages, and Sakuraba versus Henzo Gracie also got 5 pages, while Murakami versus Sadake got a page and a quarter. They had a crowd shot of the stadium and it was very close to packed, so the announced crowd looked legit. Some thoughts on the various matches. 1. Vitor Belfort, 205, Brazil, defeated Daijiro Matsui, 198, Japan, via decision. In the first round, Matsui shot in, Belfort sprawled and got behind him and started punching. Matsui was very bloody at the 6 minutes mark. Belfort controlled him in that position the entire round. In the second round, they circled for 3 minutes with nothing happening until Belfort took him down, but was caught in the guard. Matsui had a good guard in this position. He didn't take the kind of punishment he took in the first round, but Belfort was still able to score with punches throughout the round. He got a side mount with 1 minute left, but basically just kept him down the entire round. It was an easy decision but a boring spectator fight. 2. Vanderlei Silva, 204, Brazil, defeated Guy Mesger, 211, United States, in 3:45. It started off standing as both seemed to want to test their kickboxing skill. Silva was cut badly over the right eye early. Mesger also tagged him with a good high kick as they broke from a clinch. Silva rocked Mesger, who went down, but on the ground Mesger quickly reversed him. After a good standing exchange, Silva made Mesger crumble after a series of punches. Very good match. 3. Rico Rodriguez, 240, United States, defeated Giant Kaisy, 270, Japan, at 6:04. Kaisy is a total pro wrestler gimmick with his giant afro like Meng and came to the ring with two kids wearing giant afro wigs. People were entertained by the ring entrance. Rodriguez got the match to the ground early. Kaisy had more staying power than you'd think for what appeared to be a gimmick to feed Rodriguez, who has charisma for the Japanese market because of his look. He seemed to be very close with a knee bar, but Kaisy escaped. He got a mount, started pounding, went for a choke a few times, but Kaisy was able to squirm away until finally being choked from the mount. 4. Gilbert Yvel, 229, Netherlands, knocked out Gary Goodridge, 242, Canada, in 27 seconds. It was announced in the building as 128, which is where that time listed in last week's issue came from. Goodridge has incredible charisma coming to the ring, which is why, no matter what his one-loss record is, he'll continue to get booked on big shows. He had Mark Coleman in his corner, and Coleman seemed totally uncomfortable in the middle of a pro wrestling ring entrance. Hope the American pay-per-view shows the ring entrances, because to the casual audience, the fancy entrances get the product over as being major league probably more than what happens bell to bell. Just an awesome kick to the head on the first move of the match and it was over. It was a spectacular finish. 5. Mark Kerr, 251, United States, defeated Igor Borisov, 215, Russia, in 2:06. The big Kerr showed up this time. Borisov was clearly out of his league and couldn't stand with Kerr or physically stay with him. Once Kerr took him down, even though Borisov had him in a guard, Kerr used his power to bend his neck forward and got a quick tap. It was an impressive performance by Kerr, but it was clear it was an overmatched foe. Borisov ended up being taken out on a stretcher. 6. Igor Vovchankin, 231, Russia, defeated Enson Inoue, 217, Japan, in 10 minutes. The first 20 seconds were a wild, uncontrollable slugfest with the crowd going crazy. Surprisingly, since Vovchankin is the more feared stand-up fighter, it was Inoue that did more damage, as both of Vovchankin's eyes were tagged and he was very bloody and the eyes were swelling shut from the original exchange. Vovchankin got Inoue down at that point and he never got back up the rest of the match. Vovchankin with his power punching got hard shots in and kept him down and was punching him. The last minute was too much, as Vovchankin was pounding on him bad. In the words of UFC ref John McCarthy, Inoue at the end was just covering up and hoping for Mr. Wizard to save him. It definitely should have been stopped about 30 seconds before the end of the round. Inoue was totally out of it when the round ended and it took him a while before he could even get up. The doctor stopped the fight while he was in his corner. Inoue acted like he didn't want the stoppage, but it wasn't even debatable. Vovchankin is a hard hitter, so in that sense it was good, but he controlled him on the ground and there wasn't much good mat work, so it was kind of boring. 7. Masaki Sadake, 237, Japan, defeated Kazunari Murakami, 211, Japan, in 6:58. Regarding suspicions about this match, from a booking standpoint, it seemed very convenient. Naoya Ogawa was in Murakami's corner and is his UFO stablemate and tag team partner at the Tokyo Dome earlier this year. The post-match stare-down angle and announcement of Sadake versus Ogawa on the next show came off as pro wrestling. People were also suspicious because the usual good sportsmanship thing to do at the end of a fight when the ref stops it is to check on your opponent, and Sadake didn't do that. Instead, he gave a speech dedicating the fight to Andy Hug. Whatever it was, it is not an obvious work. Usually in works, you either do an entertaining match but it's clear because of the intensity factor, it's different, or it's the half work, where the guy going over doesn't know, but the guy losing takes a dive. Usually it's best to keep those matches short. Sadake didn't appear to be holding back, and if it was anything, it was that Murakami knew his role, and given how everything worked out, one should be at least suspicious. Even though of the fighters watching the match at ringside, nobody was talking about it as if it was a work, which they all do in those situations. Murakami got a leg trip early and Sadake turned his back on the ground. Sadake scored a nice backdoor escape to get to his feet, and was stronger standing, although he had a bloody nose by this point. Murakami tried to throw Sadake, but the larger man blocked it and Sadake fell on top. Sadake got a mount and started pounding on him until the ref stopped it. Not that good. 8. Kazuyuki Fujita, 242, Japan, defeated Ken Shamrock, 215, United States, in 6:46. First 4 minutes were really exciting. It was all stand-up, with Shamrock able to avoid all of Fujita's takedowns and pounding on him, bloodying up his nose. Fujita did get behind Shamrock's standing and Shamrock grabbed the ropes to avoid a takedown, which is where the yellow card came in. Shamrock rocked him with hard punches, including one where Fujita's mouthpiece flew out, and Fujita was on the verge of going. Fujita went down, more of a shove after being rocked than a knockdown. Shamrock basically let him get up, figuring he had more of an edge standing. Fujita nearly took Shamrock down with an ankle pick, but Shamrock again grabbed the ropes momentarily to steady himself, and went for a guillotine. Fujita escaped and they traded, with Shamrock coming out the better. At the 4 minutes mark, both were tiring, but Shamrock more so. Even at this point, Shamrock was still winning as they traded fists, kicks and knees at a slower pace. Fujita bulled Shamrock into the corner, where Shamrock hooked the rope again to steady himself. At this point you could see something was wrong in his face as he looked exhausted and said towel in motion, as if to throw it to his corner. His corner didn't respond at first, because it almost seemed surreal, and he kept motioning and finally they threw it in. It didn't look as dangerous as the report last week, and at least on TV he never appeared to say anything about his heart, but that report did come from someone at ringside. He just appeared to run out of gas. This may be a tough one for Shamrock to mentally handle, because I'm sure this isn't how he wants his last fighting memory to be, although he is under contract for more fights. It's not the kind of finish that the Japanese, or for that matter the North Americans who do see it on pay-per-view, will be forgiving of. In one of those pro wrestling becomes reality stories, Shamrock left the ring with Alicia Webb, Ryan Shamrock/Symphony. Fujita and Coleman shook hands after the match, and Coleman said he'd be glad to fight Fujita, and they posed together. It was interesting seeing them together because Fujita was physically much bigger than Coleman, and it'll be interesting to see if it stays that way when they get in the ring together. 9. Ryan Gracie, 176, Brazil, defeated Tokumitsu Ishizawa, 187, Japan. Ishizawa came out with 2 seconds, both wearing Kendo Kashin masks. Not only that, when he was introduced as the 34th IWGP Junior Heavyweight Champion as a credential, which was funny seeing not only a pro wrestling credential listed in a shoot intro, but the acknowledgement with that credential and his seconds that he was Kashin under the mask, even though everyone already knew it. Gracie faked a punch and scored a strong double leg takedown. Ishizawa tried for a guillotine, but wasn't even close, and when Gracie broke it, he unloaded with a flurry of punches to the face before the ref stopped it at 2:16. Every wrestling promotion that considers putting a guy with a shooter rep into an uncontrollable situation like this should get a videotape of this match, because for New Japan, this was the equivalent of the Bart Gunn vs. Butterbean embarrassment for the WWF. I think the idea here was that this Gracie had never even had a competition fight, so a New Japan guy, since Ishizawa in pro wrestling had a great shooter rep as it pertained to wrestling and submissions, could beat someone with a Gracie last name. But Ishizawa only had 1 month of training. He was secretly training with college wrestlers as well as with pancrase grapplers such as Yoshiki Takahashi and Kei Yamamiya. Yamamiya as well as former New Japan wrestler Akitoshi Saito were both in his corner for this fight after so many years of pro wrestling, and hadn't had a competitive match in something like 8 years. 10. Kazushi Sakuraba, 187, Japan, defeated Renzo Gracie, 174, Brazil, in 1943. The fact this show drew as well as it did, 32,919 fans to the Seibu Dome, speaks volumes for how well the Sakuraba vs. Gracie family program has gotten over, and that Sakuraba is finally, after the wins over the Gracies, becoming someone capable of selling tickets mainstream. What is also important to note is that the 4 big dome shows this year, which all drew well live and did great television ratings, were all headlined by small guys, as the real big drawing matches on the respective shows were Royce Gracie vs. Takada, which was actually the biggest draw of all since it involved Takada and was Royce's Japanese debut. Royce vs. Sakuraba, Hickson vs. Funaki, and Sakuraba vs. Renzo. The first round was mostly standing. Sakuraba won the round slightly but did not dominate Gracie. Second round saw Sakuraba get a quick takedown. Gracie did a butt scoot and Sakuraba would kick his leg before finally letting him up. He took him down a second time and was on top in the guard. After Sakuraba stood up, he connected with a nice high kick. Gracie started to tire and Sakuraba took him down again. Gracie reversed Sakuraba on the ground and got his back. From that position, Sakuraba reached behind him for the arm and got the Kimura lock, and the ref stopped it when Gracie's elbow dislocated. It was close enough to send it into overtime. In pride, A close fight is judged at first a draw and sent to overtime, but Sakuraba was clearly winning even before the submission. Match was very good for Japan because of the submission move winning on a Kaisy, but won't translate as well to an American audience. A couple of updates regarding the Olympic article from last week. Adnan Kaisy, when he started wrestling professionally, was billed as representing Turkey in wrestling in the 1952 and 1956 Olympics. He later migrated to the United States and was a standout wrestler at the University of Oklahoma in the late 50s before turning pro and wrestling under such names as General Adnan. He's still active in the AWA as a manager even though he's in his late 60s. Sheik Adnan L. Kaisy in the old AWA, and before that as both Adnan Kaisy and Billy White Wolf, where he wrestled all over the world for the past 4 decades. There is a Japanese publication which lists Hossein Khosrau Baziri, Iron Sheik, as having gone to the 1956 and 1960 Olympics, which is why nobody can find any records for him in 1968, and also lists Klaus Wallace as going to the 1976 Olympics and placing 6th. His placement of 6th definitely isn't the case, as there is nobody from Austria under any name placing 6th in any of the higher weight categories in judo in that Olympics. Baziri would have been 18 in 1956. Since Baziri has claimed at various times to have been in Olympics from 1968 through 1980, which was untrue, and at times claimed to have won a gold medal, also untrue, it's hard without confirmation to believe he was ever in the Olympics. He does have credentials after coming to the United States in his early 30s, such as in 1971 winning the U.S. Greco-Roman National Championships at 181 pounds while wrestling out of Minnesota and as a U.S. Olympic team assistant coach. He was a nationally known wrestler in Iran in the early 60s, and the stories that he worked as a bodyguard for the infamous Shah of Iran during that time period are also true because there are photos of him in that role we've seen when John F. Kennedy visited Iran. There are no records of a Hossein Khosrau Baziri ever being on the Iranian Olympic team any point or any wrestler with his birth date ever being in the Olympics. Earl McCready actually represented Canada in the 1928 Olympics in freestyle wrestling, not in 1932. Yoshiaki Yatsu actually represented Japan at the 1976 Olympics at 198 pounds, not at super heavyweight, in freestyle. Zaza Terminids of the Republic of Georgia, who wrestled for rings as Andrei Terminids, competed at the 1996 Olympics placing 10th in freestyle as a super heavyweight. His background includes 1987 European super heavyweight freestyle champion, silver medals in the 1989 and 1991 World Cup and 4th place finishes at the 1993 and 1995 World Championships. Alexei Medvedev of Bulgaria wrestled one match for Pro Wrestling Fujiwara-gumi, September 4, 1992 in Sapporo, Japan, losing in 2:07 to Masakatsu Funaki, went back to amateur wrestling and took a silver medal in the 1996 Olympics in freestyle as a super heavyweight and is still active and will be in Sydney this month. Medvedev has expressed interest after the Olympics in working for Pride. His record includes a 3rd place in the World Championships in 1994, 8th in 1995, 1st in the 1996 World University Games, 5th in 1997 World Championships and 6th in the 1998 World Championships. Kirill Barbutov of Bulgaria, who later worked for Rings but made no impact there, placed 9th as a super heavyweight in the 1992 Olympics in freestyle. A few more historical notes. Paul Berlenbach, who was an alternate on the 1920 team while only 19 years of age, and did a little pro wrestling, was actually a legendary pro boxer. In 1923, Berlenbach did the unheard of feat of winning the AAU National Championship in both boxing and wrestling on the same weekend. Danny Hodge, who did it in different years, Golden Gloves national title in boxing in 1959, freestyle AAU champion 3 times, last being 1956, is the only other American in history believed to have ever won a national championship in both sports. Berlenbach, who due to suffering from scarlet fever as a child, had no hearing and didn't learn to speak until the age of 15, passed up the 1924 Olympics to turn pro as a boxer. On May 30, 1925 in Madison Square Garden, he captured the world light heavyweight title from Mike McTeague in a 15-round decision. He continued to box until 1933, finishing with a 3-7, 8-2 record with 30 knockouts. Boxing aficionados labeled him as being one of the greatest body punchers in the history of the sport. In 1971, he was elected to the Pro Boxing Hall of Fame. He later did some wrestling but was not a major name. Actually, for pro wrestling fans, the most notable thing about Berlenbach may have been that on December 11, 1925, he was in the main event for the first boxing card ever held in the 3rd Madison Square Garden, beating Jack Delaney on a decision after 15 rounds before 17,675 fans. It was also the first MSG promotion for one Jess McMahon, the grandfather of Vince McMahon. Berlenbach's longtime friend and training partner, Nathaniel Pendleton, who won the silver medal as an undersized heavyweight. He weighed only 181 pounds in the 1920 Olympics in freestyle, and also competed at 181 pounds in Greco-Roman, but didn't place. It has been uncovered also did some pro wrestling. Legend has it that Pendleton was robbed of what should have been an easy decision win in the gold medal match. That has to be taken with a grain of salt considering how legends grow generations later. There are records of him as a pro wrestler in the New York area in the late 1920s, but he was never a major star and only dabbled in it. He was a major star, however, appearing in 109 movies between 1924 and 1947, usually playing the role of a muscled-up buffoon. He actually could speak 5 languages and had an economics degree from Columbia, including an Abbott and Costello movie called Buck Privates, and the Marx Brothers classic, Horse Feathers. Pendleton met Berlenbach, who was illiterate because of his childhood, while the latter was working as a cab driver. Because of the Labor Day holiday, most of the ratings for this past week were held up past press deadlines. Smackdown on August 31st drew a 5.03 rating and 8.5 share, which is well above what the show has been doing, peaking at 5.65 for the Guerrero vs. Angle match. It's impressive because they did their best rating in a while for a show where Rock was an afterthought and it was based mainly on Angle, Stephanie, Triple H, Chyna and Guerrero. Thunder on August 30th drew a 2.46 rating and 4.0 share. The show stayed steady at 2.6 until dropping to slightly over the last 45 minutes with a low point at 2.25 for Harris Twins vs. Rection and AWOL and Vito vs. Palumbo. The August 29th television 3-hour block drew a 1.5 Hispanic rating. Mexico. The third EMLL pay-per-view show will be the company's 67th anniversary show on September 29th from Marina, Mexico. Caught a tape of the August 4th EMLL pay-per-view show. It wasn't as good as the first one, but was still an easy thumbs-up show. It's not WWF quality overall when it comes to production, but it also didn't have the bad matches and most WWF pay-per-view shows have, and it blew away New Japan's first pay-per-view. EMLL, being the oldest wrestling company, is the one whose pay-per-view shows have a total feel of American pro wrestling circa 1970-85 with rabid fans and longer, but heated, intense matches, although obviously the moves and style are entirely different. The opener with Ultimo Dragoncito and Cicloncito Ramirez and Bracito de Oro vs. Fire and Firito and Pierrotito was a little rough early but ended with really hot dives by the Technico Dragoncitos team and a triple countout after all 3 Technicos delivered dives in 13-18, 2.5. Negro Casas and Brazo de Plata and Lismark Jr. beat Dr. Wagner Jr. and El Satanico and Bestia Salvaje via DQ in 15-20. Rudos took the first fall. Second fall was reminiscent of 70s style, not much in the way of wrestling but old-style blood and brawling. Porky bled first and Satanico bit Lismark Jr.'s forehead and he bled as well. Porky splashed all 3 off the top. Really this entire match was carried by Wagner and Casas, who were really good. Third fall was Wagner kicked Casas low, but the ref saw it for the DQ 2 3/4. Rey Bucanero and Ultimo Guerrero beat Mr. Niebla and Villano 4 in 21:07 of the best match on the show. Los Infernales Bucanero and Guerrero did a double-team Boston Crab, each man with half crab, on Niebla and it was the world's coolest Boston Crab set up ever. Second fall saw V4 make Guerrero submit to the abdominal stretch while Bucanero was counted out after Niebla gave him a moonsault off the top to the floor. Third fall saw all sorts of dives and submissions before Guerrero pinned Niebla with a backwards superplex flipped into a gourdbuster. Between all the heat and great wrestling in this match and seeing V4 do it, seeing V4 and Psicosis have better matches than anyone in WCW ever has in the same week for that matter, would just leave anyone shaking their head about mishandling of talent. 4 stars. Next up was a mask elimination match. The match went 33-24 and had Drive O'Borman Jr., Blue Panther, El Hijo del Gladiador, Rincor Latino, Violencia, Black Warrior, Antifaz, Astro Rey Jr., Mascara Magica, Solar One, Safari and Olympico. It started with a battle royal to determine who would start in which corner, which was as bad as a typical battle royal. The regular match started off hot as guys would tag in and out and do smooth hot spots one after the other with each other. Panther and Solar were the most fun to me because they did mat wrestling reminiscent of their classic middleweight title matches, when Solar was El Mexicano in AAA in the mid-90s. It was an elimination match, but the guys would be eliminated when they won a fall. What was bad is that the match was great, but weakened as all the good workers would win a fall and the last few minutes couldn't live up to the first 30. It was a total crazy pop for the finish, 3.5. Main event was a cage match with Villano Tercero, Pero Aguayo, Pierroth Jr. and Mascara Ano 2000. The first two guys to climb out would be eliminated, and the final two would have a match where it would have to end with a pinfall or submission. The whole deal went 27-13. The work itself would be considered pretty bad by US standards since these guys are various stages of old to ancient, and they work like old guys. But it was like watching old guys from the old school who knew psychology and when to do things and were over as legendary figures to the crowds. They were totally with it. It also had a good storyline. Aguayo, who was literally opened up seemingly before the match even started, got out first and was attacked by Cien Caras, Apollo Dantes and Universo 2000. They doubled on V3 until Mascara climbed out. However, V3 was beating on Pierroth and had him in a chicken wing submission when Pierroth begged for Mascara to save him, so risking his own hair, he climbed back in and made the save. They destroyed V3 who was bloody. Pierroth then double-crossed Mascara by climbing out, although he was attacked by Dantes for double-crossing the family. V3 got Mascara in a Cobra twist for the submission and he was shaved. 2.5 Fishman reportedly received a $20,000 payoff for dropping his mask on the August 25 GWAS show at the Palacio de los Deportes in a show that was taped for pay-per-view in Mexico on a few-week delay. Airs on September 10 for about $8 US, because in Mexico, wrestling gets daily newspaper coverage so results are known immediately. I just can't see people spending money on a pay-per-view show from a month earlier, let alone a show that was described as the Mexican equivalent to the Heroes of Wrestling. The show drew only 3,000 fans in a 22,000-plus seater and was a total mess. Fishman, who has seemingly been around forever and been avoiding dropping his mask for most of the last 10 years, he started numerous feuds in different parts of the country that were to culminate in him unmasking, because he can't work, and in every case, he disappears from the territory before the blow-off, including in one famous case after the mask was already announced and he no-showed it. He was revealed as Jose Neja, 50, who started wrestling back in 1970. However, he never showed his face after revealing his name, as he covered up and ran to the dressing room. The September 15th Arena Mexico show is supposed to be a big one as a World Cup type of event with wrestlers from Japan, US and Panama. Rey Mysterio Jr. returned as a participant on September 1st at the Auditorio in Tijuana. He goes with his son regularly on Friday nights as a spectator, working the main event teaming with Mil Mascaras and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. to beat Rey Mysterio Sr. and Phobia, subbing for no-show Dr. Wagner Jr., and Blue Panther. The report we got was the place popped big for everything he did in the match, but they didn't shoot any major angles. The place was almost sold out, estimated 5,000, which was impressive because there was no publicity for the show until 2 days before it took place because WCW didn't give him the okay to work the show until August 29. The day before the show, according to someone that was down there, you couldn't go anywhere in town without seeing a poster that Mysterio Jr. would be returning. They were building up a major show on September 29th, with Suki, formerly Max Mini in WWF, putting up his mask, even though he was unmasked in WWF, against the hair of Espectrito, Mini Vader in WWF, and a main event trio of Santo and Mysterio Jr. and Nicho, Psicosis, which I believe would be the first time these three ever teamed up. It's not a definite since Mysterio Jr. only got the okay to work the one shot. The Minis mask versus hair was set up when Espectrito beat Zuki on the September 1st show to win the IWC Minis title, whatever that is, when the Kiss hit Suki with a chair shot in the third fall. All Japan. Besides the Chonofuchi match, the Budokan show was headlined by Hansen and Tenryu over Williams and Kawada in 26:54 when Hansen pinned Williams after a lariat. Overall, it was said to be a very hot show, mainly because of the interpromotional angle. But also the main event was said to be very physical, a six-man tag with Mike Barton and Johnny Smith and Sedman over Taiokiya and Jinsei Shinzaki and Muhammad Yone. Barton pinned Yone with a power bomb. Was said to be good, as was a three-way with Halloween over Super Kalo and Super Parka. The Toryuman Trios match with Susumu Mochizuki and Masaaki Mochizuki and Yasushi Kanda over Shima and Suwa and Sumo Dandy Fuji was said to be very good. New Japan's Shiro Koshinaka visited Motoko Baba's home on September 4th, which was his 42nd birthday, and they also spent 1 hour talking at the office. Pro Wrestling Noah. They are opening up a one-man office in Honolulu. August 23rd TV did a 2.8 rating. New Japan. In what I'd consider something of a big surprise, the New Japan TV show on September 2nd aired the Ryan Gracie vs. Tokumitsu Ishizawa match from Pride. I guess they must have figured since everyone knew, they might as well show it. When WWF had the fiasco with Bart Gunn and Butterbean, if you recall, the match after the fact, despite the spectacular-looking finish, was not only never shown, nor the finish ever shown, but never even referred to again by the WWF. Next big show is September 12th at Korakuen Hall with Manabu Nakanishi vs. Shiro Koshinaka on top, and an IWGP Junior Tag title match with Minoru Tanaka and Koji Kanemoto defending against Jushin Liger and Shinya Makabe. Don Frye returns teaming with Hiroyoshi Tenzan against Yuji Nagata and Brian Johnston. The tour runs from September 9th through September 17th. Other Japan notes. AJW has title matches upcoming on September 17th at Differ Ariake with Manami Toyota defending the WWWA title against Kaoru Ito and Nani Takahashi defending the Pacific Belt against Miho Wakizawa. September 23rd in Hakata has the WWWA tag titles defended by Takahashi and Momoe Nakanishi against Wakizawa and KO Nomi. Road Warriors return to Japan from September 24th to October 1st for Battlers. Among their foes will be Yuki Ishikawa and Naoki Sano, Alexander Otsuka and Osamu Tashiakari, actually two guys that have each worked in jobber roles for Pride, Rastaman and Kazunari Murakami, New Japan, Pride. EFC Abdullah the Butcher returned to Big Japan on August 29th at Korakuen Hall. He lost a loser leaves town match a few months back to Men's Teo, and appears to be coming back as a babyface tag partner for Shadow WX against the CZW crew. The Jumping Bomb Angels, who were big stars in Japan and later were a short-term house show sensation for the WWF, reunited on the August 30th LLPW show at Korakuen Hall. It was billed as Norio Tadano's 20th anniversary show. Itsuki Yamazaki, who got married and retired from pro wrestling and is now living in New York, made a surprise run-in doing double-team moves together. They're billing Yoshiko Tamura's win over Nicole Bass on August 23rd in Wildwood, New Jersey as being both for the NWA Pacific Women's title and the Neo Ladies World title. The original plan was for Tamura to beat Debbie Malenko, coming out of retirement and capture the title, but Malenko, no relation to Dean but was trained by the family, didn't come out of retirement. There was a wire service story that Yoshimoto Kogyo Company is planning on expanding its women's wrestling promotion, JD, to Taiwan, after getting its matches starting on the cable sports channel there in November. They also want to train their wrestlers to become action actresses and do movies and TV dramas, with the idea of training pro wrestlers to become international stars. Live pro wrestling is banned in Taiwan, but matches are popular on TV there. The Cuban Olympic team has been training with the Japanese team in Japan. The Cuban super heavyweight in Greco, whose name is something close to Itol832, claimed he would beat Karelin in the Olympics and then wanted to turn pro in All Japan or New Japan, since they've expressed interest. He said WWF and WCW haven't expressed interest, but he'd be interested in them as well. Here and there. Out like a lamb department. The Catch Wrestling Association in Austria and Germany is no more. Otto Wanz officially announced cancellation of the 10-day tournament and catch festival scheduled for the end of the year in Bremen, Germany, which was the only events left on his schedule. He said he wouldn't promote any more pro wrestling shows, just do strongman contests. The CWA was considered something of a major force in wrestling in the late 70s through probably the early 90s. Many of the biggest names in the business, both from North America as well as most of the young New Japan wrestlers early in their careers, did regular tours there in the early parts of their career and credit a lot of their development to wrestling in the same building 30 or more days in a row, forcing them to adapt and change up what they do, not to mention the lack of travel makes it almost like a working European vacation for a foreigner. The Catch Festival would see Wands bring in many big names, usually a few Americans and Japanese and virtually all the top workers in Europe. Like the regionals in the United States, the old-style product couldn't hold up from a flashiness and TV production standpoint, and the idea of running the same building so many days in a row simply was no longer economically viable, and the company has gone downhill since the retirement of Wands 10 years ago. But probably the most important factor was seeing the TV from America and Japan in the country. Wands himself, who was the big star of the company in its glory days, particularly peaking with his feud with Leon Bullpower White aka Big Van Vader, once he retired, never was able to create a new top draw. The list of those who worked for Wands is endless, from Benoit to Muto to Chono to Owen Hart to Scott Hall to Terry Funk to Funaki to Liger to Tenzan to Kojima to Vader from this era and dating back to the biggest names of previous eras as well. Wands himself held the AWA title at one time. Image Comics' new release called The 10th Muse is drawn with the main character based on Rena Mero. In the NWA title tournament on September 19th in Tampa, it'll be Steve Corino, Fidel Sierra, Dan Severn, Hector Guerrero, Kendall Windham, Kevin Northcutt, Greg Valentine, and Joe Malenko. Gary Steele of England was originally going to be the final participant, but he pulled out, and Barry Windham is now working construction full-time and couldn't get off work. Buddy Colt Ron Reed, who was a top heel in the early 70s, will be the figurehead commissioner for the NWA Florida group. The Canadian Post on August 30th had an article on Tony Parisi. According to the article, his real name was Anthony Pugliese and he changed it to Parisi because it was an easier name to pronounce. He was born in Spenzano Piccolo, Calabria in southern Italy. IWA in Puerto Rico is slowly picking up. They had their first break-even week a few weeks back after suffering pretty big, as much as $12,000 losses per week, during their startup period. IWA is now on in many markets in the US at 1 a.m. on Monday nights on the Telemundo network. Kurt Angle vs. Christopher Daniels and Taka Michinoku vs. Mikey Henderson appear on September 13th at the Galaxy Theater in Los Angeles for Ultimate Pro Wrestling. Barring a miracle, which would mean a bailout or a working agreement with WWF or WCW, the prospects long-term for Stampede Wrestling looks to be bleak. Psychosis and Too Cold Scorpio are headlining a tour in Australia for the Australian Wrestling Federation. Reports are the matches, which consist of predominantly Australian wrestlers, including Australian-based former Stampede wrestler Jason Helton, and a wrestler called Das Blitzkrieg who may be the former WCW Blitzkrieg, since I know they wanted him for this tour, who was said to be a spectacular high-flyer. Even though the show drew raves as compared with the recent Dennis Rodman tour, using Rodman and names from the past, this didn't draw. They had a small crowd in Melbourne, a crowd of 200 in Sydney on September 3rd and a show in Brisbane cancelled due to no advance. Scorpio Psychosis in Sydney was reported to us as possibly the best live match this year in Australia. XPW scrapped the planned September 8th TV taping because they haven't found a new venue after leaving the massive Los Angeles sports arena. WWC had its Bombasso 2000 weekend this past weekend. Americans working Puerto Rico at this point are One Man Gang, Dutch Mantle, Steve Dahl and Barry and Kendall Windham. Windhams are challenging tag champs Thunder and Lightning. Gang is doing a blood program with Carlos Colon and Dahl is challenging Carly Colon for the Universal Belt. Latest Puerto Rico TV ratings are on August 26th. WWC did an 11.0 and 40 share, IWA did a 6.3 and 20 share and WWF did an 11.3 and 24 share and August 27th saw WWC do an 11.4 and 35 share and IWA drew a 6.3 and 18 share. XPW is claiming it'll be purchasing a new 2,500 to 3,000 seat arena in Los Angeles as its home base, to run live shows every other week as well as house its training school. They also will start running in cities like San Jose, Modesto, San Diego, and the Inland Empire. MMA Yoshiaki Yatsu held a press conference on August 31st to announce he would fight on the October 31st Pride show in Osaka. It is being billed as the 20th anniversary of Yatsu's pro wrestling debut. His actual first match was December 29, 1980 in Madison Square Garden, beating Jose Estrada. Yatsu started training this past week in Japan with the Japanese and the Cuban Olympic teams, which are training together in a camp in Yamanashi. The final Pancrase show of the year will be December 9th in Hirosaki, which is Masakatsu Funaki's hometown, for him to have his retirement ceremony. ECW caught the complete Tao vs. Psychosis match from Hardcore TV last week and would probably give it 4 1/4. It was one of the best matches of the year in the US. Tao was out of this world and Psychosis was able to uphold his end and the crowd reactions made it something pretty special. The irony of seeing the crowd go nuts and seeing about that nothing in WCW since Benoit Hart nearly 1 year ago can even compare to is funny in light of how WCW misuses talent on the guys the public won't be interested in great matches and the idea espoused within the company that the American fans can't get interested in foreign talent because they don't speak the language. And here you've got foreign talent against each other, one of whom theoretically should have been destroyed as in kind of a player because of how he was treated in WCW, getting huge crowd reactions largely for having a super match and nothing else. Granted, ECW Arena is a prime location to do something like that because of its history, but these two got that reaction without any serious storyline build-up and ultimately that match would have gotten over, although not as good as in that particular arena, and other arenas as well. ECW did overreach a little when claiming that Tao and Psychosis got their first US breaks in ECW. It's true about Tao. But no way they can claim credit for Psychosis' first break in the US. Psychosis was higher on sellout shows on the West Coast and a headliner on 3 nights a week primetime highly rated shows, as well as on a pay-per-view a couple of years before he ever went to ECW and before ECW even had pay-per-view or national TV. I suppose they could claim his ECW first run proved he could get over past just the Hispanic audience, but he'd already been to Japan a few times by then. If they're trying to say that because it was his first English-speaking company and thus was a career break, it can't qualify as that either, because WCW treated his ECW success as no more important than all the rest of his success when burying him for years. September 1st TNN show was the first show taped from the Hammerstein Ballroom in Manhattan. They aired matches including the finals of the tag team tournament. The finals, Dreamer and Lynn vs. Whipwreck and Tao vs. Swinger and Diamond, was good, but made better by the wrestlers all being at ringside pounding on the mat to get the crowd going for the finish. And the huge crowd pop for the finish, which really put the belts over. WCW. The Fall Brawl pay-per-view on September 17th in Buffalo, New York has T vs. Nash, Goldberg vs. Steiner, Jarrett vs. Awesome in a bunkhouse match, Kidman vs. Douglas in a scaffold match, FAs and Vito vs. Thrillers in either an elimination match or some sort of a gauntlet match, Sting vs. Muta vs. Vampiro, Chronic vs. Harris Twins in a chain match, Storm vs. Rection for the Canadian title, Skipper vs. Kiwi for the Cruiserweight title, and a women's tag match with Paisley and Tigress vs. Guns and a dreaded mystery partner. The show has about 3,200 tickets sold so far, so they are hoping for 5,000 paid. Those numbers are only slightly ahead of what ECW is expected to do there a week earlier. Nitro on September 4th from Dallas was a well-scripted show with nothing close to good wrestling. Mysterio Jr. and Guerrera kept the tag titles over ICP when Mysterio Jr. pinned Violent J after the leg drop off the groin off the top rope. It was like watching a car wreck, but at least an entertaining one. Conan was tremendous on color doing these backhanded compliments to ICP. They did a series of skits with Major Guns running on a treadmill, working out and finally swimming laps. It didn't amount to much except it ended with Pamela Paulshock thrown in the pool in a pool fight with MIA and what's left of Team Canada. Russo and Nash did a show-long swerve pretending to be at odds, but in the end hugged and made up when Nash got the title in War Games. They do these swerves every week where a heel is about to turn face but doesn't, to where the guy actually turning when it's telegraphed would be a swerve. The cage lowered. Nash was about to attack Russo when Sting came from under the ring. Since they were swerving, does that mean Sting was in on the swerve? Nash flipped Russo off and walked out on him. Jarrett, Booker and Kat were all involved and Russo ran away. Goldberg tried to head him off but Russo veered left to escape Goldberg, which I guess explains why Goldberg never lasted in the NFL. Scott Hudson was gone as apparently his wife went into labor, so Jeremy Borash, with a bald head from losing a bet with Russo on the first quarter-hour rating for last week, got to do the show, which probably also shows just how much in the doghouse 10A really is. Borash seemed intimidated and didn't say much. They set up qualifying matches to get into War Games. Sting beat Vampiro and Muta in 111. Muta blew missed at Vampiro and Sting pinned him after the Scorpion Death Drop. Booker pinned Stevie Ray. Stevie jumped him at the bell, but explained he wanted to make him alert for whatever happened, and they hugged afterwards like two guys who had a classic match. The announcers put this 2 minutes bout over like it was a classic, but it was actually pretty bad. Obviously someone watched Raw a few weeks back because Chronic played the Acolytes beating up Dragons who played Kai and Tai. Chronic then beat up all the members of 3 Count. Overall, on the night between Raw and Nitro, it really sucked to be a small guy. They challenged the Harris Twins. Tony Schiavone actually said, "Every fan in the world wants to see the Harris Twins against Chronic." Either Schiavone is ill-informed or it's a masochistic world, and unfortunately for Schiavone, the world isn't that masochistic. Chronic beat Kat in a handicap match to get into War Games even with interference from the Harris Twins. Goldberg destroyed Douglas with the spear and jackhammer, and laid out all the natural-born Thrillers as well, who interfered right in front of the ref who just stood by. Arn Anderson noted that he and Ric Flair would be at David's wedding next week on Nitro. The announcers never plugged the fact that the biggest ratings draw in the company would be on next week's show when they'll need all the help they can get going against football and WWF. All 6 Thrillers beat Vito, who held his own for a while until they overwhelmed him. War Games was very strange. The deal was the belt would be on the top of the 3rd cage and whoever got it, then had to climb down, and whoever walked out the door with the belt was champ. Nash played his real-life role as the smartest man in the promotion who gets all the glory while being the laziest guy in the company inside the ring. Now that they've made it his gimmick with this match, it's even funnier. Jarrett started with Sting. Steiner came in, followed by Chronic, followed by Russo, who came in wearing a hockey helmet, holding a baseball bat, and with the Harris twins. Sting ended up having Russo in the Scorpion Forever, which luckily does no damage in real life since Russo not only survived it, but was fine once Nash came in. Booker and Goldberg came in after that. The idea the teams alternated every 2 minutes was thrown out, as was the idea the match can't end until everyone is in, although nobody actually tried to win until everyone was in. The new rules didn't make for a better match, but it, at 18:45, was the longest match on TV for the company since Russo came aboard and the longest match on WCW since the famous Bret Hart-Benoit match in Kansas City. Nobody will mistake this match for that one in the year-end balloting either. Not much to the wrestling, but it was scripted with a lot of twists, so it didn't drag much. Goldberg was handcuffed to the cage quickly. Booker got the belt. Sting got handcuffed. Jarrett hit Booker with a guitar and handcuffed him, with the belt falling to the bottom. Russo got the belt. Kat came in and kicked Russo, but Nash power-bombed Kat, dropping him in a very clumsy manner. Goldberg broke the handcuffs and killed everyone, and was ready to leave the cage except Hart showed up and slammed the door on his head. Hey, this was the arena. Terry Gordy did that same thing to Kerry Von Erich and ignited the territory. I have a feeling it's not going to work as well this time. Nash and Russo hugged as Nash left with the belt. WCW and WWF both are interested in putting together something with Susan Hawk versus Kelly Wigglesworth from Survivor. The New York Post ran a story on that and also included ECW in the list of those interested, but I'm figuring Paul Heyman said it to get him press. Hey, they plugged his next pay-per-view in the story when he said he was interested, because he knows if they want to do something, they aren't going to do it on his stage. They'd better do it quick because both of their 15 minutes of fame are ticking, but if it's done in the next month or two, it probably won't sell many buys, but it'll at least give the company that signs them a whole lot of pub. If they do it on Monday TV, it probably will help the ratings because tons of people will watch them fight as a novelty for free, but I don't see people spending $30 to see it. On the August 30th early show on CBS, the two were on together and talked about the possibility of doing a match but sort of made a joke about it, saying the first one to make the other eat tapioca wins. With all the recent cuts, there are now less than 50 wrestlers under contract. Thunder on August 29th from Tucson, Arizona was just a show. At least that's an improvement over some terrible Thunders the past few weeks. Some funny stuff. Chronic versus Storm and Skipper. When it was written and at the production meeting, it was for Storm and Skipper to look strong. Instead, Chronic sold nothing for Skipper and almost nothing for Storm. Several noted that's become a regular deal that Chronic gets to change the story in their matches. The storyline was built around the Thrillers, who Nash booked, with Kat out, in a bunch of matches, each one of which they lost, leading to Steiner hitting them each with a pipe after the loss in what was called Tough Love. Orndorff, at 52, and I don't even want to think about what that guy is doing to be as muscular as he is at that age, was the other focal point. He did an interview that was pretty good, but Schiavone told him the Thrillers all laugh at him behind his back. This led to an arm wrestling match where Orndorff used his weak right arm and punched Stasiak and turned the table over on him, and laid all the guys out with some chair shots. O'Hare was cut hard way and two of the other guys had knots from the shots. Leah Meow is doing a dominatrix gimmick with Young Dragons where they have to lick her boots when they screw up, but when they win, she'll lick theirs. Main event was Nash vs. Kat, which ended with all the heels destroying Kat, Booker and Mrs. Jones, who Jarrett hit with a guitar shot. They showed a crowd shot when Jones was being manhandled, but then did show the guitar shot. The inconsistency of standards is overwhelming. Regarding Brad Siegel's statement about wrestlers being fined for being late, so far Nash has been fined twice, Mysterio Jr., Guerrera and Conan have been fined twice. They traveled together. And Kidman was fined once. In one of the cases, I think it was on the Canadian tour when they got lost and came 15 to 20 minutes late. Nash complains so much that he's been given a 1-hour grace period, saying that the guys, the way the timing works in some cases, aren't getting adequate time to train, and he called Ace a stooge, claiming he was behind the fines, and Ace told him his info was BS. Nash then arrived late on Tuesday. There was a major push to bring Hall back and in fact to have him back on the September 4th show. Because Hall either is or will be medically cleared to return to the ring in a week or two, after his neck surgery from February from the Jarrett guitar shot and Sid powerbomb, that will bump his pay up from $16,000 to $32,000 per week, and the argument is, why are they paying a guy $32,000 to not use him? Supposedly Siegel is against ever bringing Hall back for the obvious reasons. The feeling is what they want to do is have a segment where they call Hall on the phone and people hear his real voice. with the idea the crowd would pop huge for it and then expect him back, and at that point Siegel would change his mind. The problem, for better or worse, is, if he gets worked like that and it works, he'll be worked constantly on everything. Of course, the argument about paying him so much and not using him, nobody is using for guys like Bagwell, Luger, Page and Sid, who are out of the picture right now because Russo doesn't want to use them on TV. Not that's he wrong, because the morale has gone way up with the idea that the guys who aren't cooperative, with Chronic as the noted example of somehow getting things changed from the original script to the final in-ring product, aren't around even though they are highly paid names. Chronic is telling people they were willing to job to Mysterio Jr. and Guerrera and work with them, but they still sell almost nothing for them on the road. Leah Meow is doing a dominatrix gimmick with Young Dragons where they even crawl up to her and lick her boots. On the Friday night fights on ESPN2 on September 1st, they had an electrical problem causing the lights to start flickering, and one of the announcers said they were expecting Sting to show up. Abbott was asked by management to take singing lessons, but he didn't, figuring his singing was going to be terrible with or without lessons. It is believed he has a no-cut contract. The natural-born Thriller's nickname backstage among some of the wrestlers is Gangrene. The Orndorff angle has roots in what is a shoot to the extent that the Thrillers really are very negative about Paul Orndorff and the Sarge, Dwayne Bruce, because of the drill sergeant mentality and borderline torture they went through as part of power plant training. Palumbo, Sanders, Jindrak, DDP and Nash worked over the weekend for Heartland Wrestling. On September 1st at a casino show in Rising Sun, Indiana, Nash seconded the Thrillers to win a 3-team main event over HWA wrestlers. On September 2nd in Fort Loramie, Ohio at Classic Fest, the Thrillers with Nash in their corner beat Anthony McMurphy and Ray Steele and Cody Hawk when Nash interfered. On September 3rd in the same building, Shark Boy and Hawk and McMurphy beat Thrillers when DDP interfered, giving Sanders a diamond cutter. HWA has Jim Duggan and Bret Hart booked for appearances in October at the casino. Mike Mooneyham in the Charleston Post and Courier ran his column on August 27 on William Solowayko, Klondike Bill, who wrestled from 1959-78, finishing his career with Jim Crockett Promotions, and headed the ring crew with Gordon Nelson, another former wrestler who also recently has had health problems after suffering a stroke, for Crockett and later WCW until his health failed due to a neuromuscular disease similar to Lou Gehrig disease. Solowayko, 68, is technically suffering from bulbar palsy, and the prognosis is not good. At one time Solowayko was in the Guinness Book of World Records for a 1965 incident at the world-famous Big Texan Steakhouse, where if you can eat a 72-ounce steak in under 1 hour, you get it free. Many wrestlers over the years have collected on that, but Bill actually ate 2 of them in one sitting. They may try and allude to the top heel group of Jarrett, Russo, Nash, Steiner and Bret Hart as some sort of a WWF faction, obviously without quite saying that for legal reasons. Russo wanted to be dragged behind the truck in the desert by Goldberg, but the higher-ups nixed the angle because it was believed to be too close to a heated case in the news where a guy was dragged behind a truck. Russo was very upset about this. On the late-night commercials for Backyard Wrestling tapes, they also advertised footage of Tylene Buck, Major Guns, in various states of undress. In promoting for a November show in Birmingham, England, Goldberg had some positive press in the area selling the athletic challenge of pro wrestling. He showed his forearm scar and said he got it from punching through a limo window, and that wasn't fake. Too bad it should have been. Overall response to Goldberg's tour was considered disappointing for his autograph sessions, usually just a few hundred per appearance. Ticket sales for London, Manchester and Birmingham on the first weekend were about 60% of what they were a similar period for the first tour. It appears the shows won't bomb, but that they probably won't be doing packed houses this time either. Goldberg did SMTV, a Saturday morning kids show, and The Big Breakfast, Channel 4 show similar to Good Morning America. On Breakfast, he said WCW was better than WWF. Well, what could he say? But he praised Rock, saying he was a good representative of the sport. On a BBC Two radio show on September 4th, when asked about Hogan, Goldberg praised him by saying he was the man who made wrestling what it is today, and at first said Hogan was on a vacation, but later said he was in a dispute with WCW. Goldberg said he was up for the lead role in a movie based on the comic book and old TV show The Incredible Hulk. He said he had 3 years left on this contract, would sign one contract after that point, presumably with WWF, and then retire. How many guys have said they were going to retire after their contract expired? And how many guys have ever walked away from wrestling while at their peak and with big money being waved in their face and never looked back again? I mean, before the age of 60 or before injury or health problems forced them out. I guess Bruno did really try just before he turned 46, but even he ended up coming back a few years later. Jack Briscoe in 1984 at the age of 43 did tell his brother one day in the middle of a WWF run that he was going home and he never came back, but he was also about to fall to mid-card status if he stuck around much longer and nobody was waving huge money at him to stay. Speaking of Goldberg, there was an altercation before Nitro between Goldberg and Evan Karagias. According to the report we received, Goldberg was talking with Nash when Karagias came up to shake his hand. Goldberg's hand was otherwise occupied and Karagias said it was okay. Goldberg didn't need to shake his hand. Goldberg, who had just flown in from England and was short-tempered, got mad thinking Karagias was dissing him and apparently told Karagias to leave. Karagias, thinking Goldberg was only kidding him, since he was only kidding Goldberg and joking around, didn't leave. Goldberg then snatched Karagias, including supposedly ripping the necklace off him and probably scaring him half to death. Later Goldberg apologized, but Karagias wouldn't accept the apology. Some wrestlers told Karagias to keep it quiet to protect Goldberg. Although I'm sure everyone will deny any tie-in, another planned situation where Chronic was going to mop the floor with 3 count on Thunder was changed, 3 count laying out Chronic. Of course, when Chronic got the script, as you can imagine, they complained about it being changed from what they were originally told. Bret Hart at this point isn't booked on the September 11th Nitro, nor can he appear on the September 25th Nitro. He has medical tests scheduled on that day. On the September 5th Thunder tapings, they wanted him to do the so-called shoot interview and rip on Vince McMahon, but he refused to say anything about McMahon on the show. Conan is trying to get a medical release early from Dr. James Andrews so he can be bumped back up to full pay as he's still on half pay due to injury even though he has wrestled on TV. On the August 28th Nitro, the fan in the stands who got involved during the Chronic vs. Harris Twins cage match was Chris Harris. Guerrero was in very serious negotiations to renew his contract as he was offered a small raise. Big Al, who had that memorable pay-per-view match with Abbott earlier this year at the Cow Palace, is the offensive line coach at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Funk is going to work the September 22nd Amarillo House show against Storm. Thunder tapings on August 29th in Tucson, Arizona drew 3,550, which was 2,411, paying $60,896. Nitro on September 4th in Dallas at Reunion Arena drew 4,363, which was 3,534, paying $138,535. WWF. The lawsuit filed by the WWF against WCW regarding trademark infringement, largely based on Scott Hall and Kevin Nash's original debut in WCW, was settled out of court probably within the past few weeks. There is now no outstanding legal issues between the companies as WCW's lawsuit against WWF, which was basically a countersuit to WWF's original, was also dropped. We don't have anything official on the September 24th Unforgiven pay-per-view from Philadelphia, but the wrestlers have been told of a 4-way for the title with Rock, Undertaker, Kane and Benoit and a singles match with Triple H vs. Angle plus Austin appearing at the show to find out who drove the car that ran him over. Notes from September 4th Raw from Rupp Arena in Lexington. Steven Regal worked a dark match beating Chris Michaels, as did Nick Dinsmore and Rob Conway of OVW. The Office was apparently so impressed with Regal that they wanted him to start as quickly as possible on the road at house shows working with the Naked Man. First hour was good but the second hour except the main dragged. Show started with a great nearly 30-minute segment with Triple H and Stephanie out there, then Foley, talking about who filed the police report against Triple H. It ended up with everyone in the ring and out of the ring, adding Angle, Guerrero and China suspects, and the fans all thought it was Angle, but finally Test confessed, as after nearly 1 year, he's finally remembered the wedding angle. A 30-minute angle to set up a 2-minute squash match. Kane beat Benoit via DQ. This was a night with uncharacteristic problems. Foley called Triple H the WWF champion, which was an acceptable mistake. Kane's fireworks didn't explode in the ring during his entrance. Kane went for a reverse suplex on Benoit and lost control of him, and dropped him right on his head, which looked scary. Benoit said afterwards that he was fine and wasn't going to miss any action. Kane attacked Rock, so Benoit hit Kane with a chair for the DQ. Rock used the rock bottom on Kane after the match. Dudleys beat Acolytes in a table match when Kai En-Tai accidentally hit Farouk with the flagpole and the Dudleys powerbombed Bradshaw through a table. Acolytes killed Kai En-Tai after the match, Bradshaw powerbombing Taka through a table and Farouk depositing Funaki on him. It always sucks to be Japanese in the American wrestling world, and it pretty well sucks to be small, so being small in Japanese is really bad. In another good segment, Guerrero won the IC title in a three-way over Angle and China. It was originally a single with Angle versus China, but Guerrero begged Foley just to be allowed in the match to help China. China took a nice Harley race bump over the top and out. Angle still seemed off in this match. Angle hit China with the title belt, but Guerrero suplexed Angle over the top to the floor. Guerrero hugged China and the ref counted 3 and 4-0-2. Guerrero acted like he didn't want the belt and kept apologizing to China. Finally, when China accepted the apology and they hugged, he did the Bret Hart smirk, indicating he double-crossed everyone. For all that talk, Triple H not only destroyed Test, but Albert as well, giving both the pedigree. RTC came out with Richards announcing that Venus would be joining the group. Venus did a tremendous interview turning them down, calling them hypocrites. Crash was practicing lines to pick up women when Bossman poured a drink over his head. Malenko tried to stand up to Bossman, but Bossman pie-faced him. Blackman beat Bossman in a hardcore title match when Crash threw coffee in Bossman's face. Blackman then laid out both Crash and Malenko with garbage can lids. It really sucked to be short. And then Taz came out and you knew it wasn't going to be his night. Dog and Venus beat Goodfather and Buchanan when Dog pinned Goodfather. Venus got laid out by a DDT on the floor, then Goodfather and Buchanan carried him to the parking lot where he was abducted by the RTC. I smell a Patty Hearst, the captor ends up on the same side as those who kidnap him, Angle coming. Lawler and Jericho beat Taz and Mideon in 0-1, that's what the stopwatch says, so I guess it was a fast count. Mideon came in doing his naked man character, and wearing actually a lot more clothing than most naked men do. He looked like an out-of-shape European biker running around on the beach in Speedos. He also came out to Hogan's music. I guess it could have been worse, because it could have been Patterson in the Speedos. Taz was pinned immediately by Lawler, but after the match choked him out with a strap. They announced Austin would do a taped interview on Smackdown. They also indicated they are reviving the car running him over Angle. ENC beat Undertaker and Rock in the main event. ENC not only got a lot of offense in, but won clean. Undertaker set up Rock's hot tag and the place exploded. Benoit and Kane both got involved with Undertaker. Edge hit Rock with a chair once and Rock kicked out, but ENC did the sandwich chair shot on Rock and Christian pinned him. Was that finish ever a shocker? At least Rock is willing to help get new guys elevated. After the live show ended, Undertaker chokeslammed Kane and Rock gave him a people's elbow. Some highlights from the September 5th tapings in Louisville. OVW wrestlers Russ McCulloch, Flash, Robbie D and Damaja worked the dark matches. For Heat, Gangrel beat Crash when Bossman interfered. This led to Malenko beating Bossman in the main event when Crash hit Bossman with a nightstick. Bossman destroyed Malenko and Crash afterwards and Crash juiced heavy. Taz came out with Lawler's crown as if he'd beaten him up and did commentary. X-Pac beat Jericho with a low blow and feet on the ropes. Rock challenges ENC to a handicap match and agreed to put up his title because they pinned him on Raw. Acolytes were at a Louisville bar and invite the Dudleys down. Benoit pinned Rikishi. RTC attacked Rikishi after and Too Cool saved, but RTC left Too Cool laying. China and Guerrero argued about Monday. Guerrero tried to give her the belt but she kept complaining. Guerrero throws the belt down, walked out and said it was over. Dudley showed up at the bar and acolytes gave them a pounding in a bar fight with broken glass, a broken crutch, etc. Lawler returned and choked Taz with a strap and that was the end of Taz as announcer and Lawler was back in his role. Triple H beat Tanda in a handicap match. Key spot was Test about to hit Stephanie so Angle made the save. Albert went after Angle, turned around and got pedigreed. Guerrero beat Dog to keep the title with help from China. Guerrero still attacked Dog after but China tries to get him to stop. Guerrero and China left together but had heat. Too Cool beat RTC when Rikishi and the Hose interfered, leading to everyone dancing. Undertaker beat Angle via DQ when Benoit interfered. Triple H saved Undertaker by attacking Angle and they fought to the back. In the ring, Undertaker gave Benoit the last ride. Stephanie got mad at Triple H for attacking Angle since Angle had saved her earlier. Austin's interview was only 2 minutes, saying that he hadn't forgotten who ran him over and said he was coming to the pay-per-view to get a confession out of whomever did it. Rock attacked ENC backstage and injured E. Christian picked Kane as his partner. Christian and Kane ended up fighting each other because each had pins and the partner would break it up because they wanted the title. Edge came out to help Christian. Rock uses the rock bottom on Christian for the pin. After the match, Kane choke slammed Rock through the announcer's table. According to reports from the live shows in Greensboro and Fayetteville, The reason the Triple H vs. Guerrero match in Greensboro and the Guerrero vs. Angle match in Fayetteville had no heat is because women in the stands were showing their breasts to get attention, and the fans didn't care about the matches. One woman in the stands was in the middle of doing her routine when Triple H came out, and he came out to no pop. When security tried to take one of the women away, a fight broke out, so nobody was watching the match. In Fayetteville, no women were showing their breasts all night until Lawler got on the house mic during the final commercial break and said that they've got a 2-minute break, so let's see 2 minutes worth of puppies. It distracted the crowd and resulted in nobody caring about the Angle vs. Guerrero main event. WWF held a press conference largely for what appears to be a publicity stunt as well as footage for its own television, which was carried on C-SPAN, challenging Bush and Gore to debate on Smackdown, with Ventura as the moderator. At the press conference were Foley, presented as a New York Times #1 best-selling author, Chyna as the IC champion, Lita as the women's champion, Angle as the Olympic gold medalist, and Linda McMahon as the CEO of WWFE. It got tons of press, including some newspaper front-page stories, complete with the worked 14 million voter figure. Lots of talk regarding the added footage in the DVD of Beyond the Mat that was released, in particular Foley's comments about being mad Dwayne Johnson didn't even check to see how he was or appear at all appreciative for what he did after laying him out with all those brutal chair shots. Mike Moran and Tom Benninghouse, who were in WCW as both Texas Hangman and Disorderly Conduct, are scheduled for a tryout on September 18th and September 19th. From SmackDown this past week, in a correction, we had reported Bull Buchanan overrode Dog in our report last week, but Dog actually was the one who went over. On that show, Hardy's and Lita vs. E&C and Jackie was a good match, and Snow's European title win over Saturn was even better. Since WWF used JR's Bell's palsy to get heat for an angle with Taz, if WCW is to do it again, while it would be classless for knocking the opposition, it wouldn't be any more exploitive than what WWF is doing. Venus dumped Stratus as his manager. There is a promotion in England claiming several WWF stars including Rock and Kane for their show, including one on September 6th at Stoke-on-Trent, England at King's Hall. An article even states there will never be so many top-class WWF stars on the same bill. Apparently the promotion in other cities has done the same thing, and used fat, old British guys doing their gimmicks. At one show the fans were so upset they rioted and pelted the phony guys with chairs. Angle had his bell rung again in the August 29th SmackDown match with Guerrero and was foggy as it pertained to spots, and Guerrero walked him through it. There was a lot of criticism, and justifiably, on WWF this past week for its handling of Angle, mainly that Angle should have never gone back out the second time at SummerSlam if there was fear, which there was, that he really had a concussion from the table breaking early and him landing with a bad angle. And after spending all night in the hospital, he probably shouldn't have taken that bump when Triple H shoved him out of the ring on Raw, let alone done a match on SmackDown. The fact he couldn't remember his spots in the SmackDown match pretty well says it wasn't a good idea for him to be in the ring. The mentality in wrestling is that you, above all when injured, finish your match. And there's a strong mentality to work when injured. But the situation with Bret Hart, as well as the fact that in football they don't put players back in after a concussion, and that boxing has mandated lengthy suspensions after knockouts, all speaks directly to safety concerns that there is no reason pro wrestling, as thriving a business as at least the WWF is these days, shouldn't have standards at least approximating that of other dangerous contact sports. The suit filed by the World Wildlife Fund over the WWF allegedly breaching an agreement they had from 1994 about the WWF using those initials in forms of marketing made a lot of press this past week. The suit was actually filed some time back and covered here at that time. There has also been interest expressed in Christopher Daniels. Scott Overholzer, who worked as Scotty Sabre in OVW, was dropped from his developmental deal. Some other notes from there. They're giving the Monster Man push to Leviathan, David Bautista, who is about 6'6" and 300 pounds and an amazing physical specimen standing there. They did an angle where Big Show choke slammed him, and he popped right up and speared him. As of the most recent tapes we've seen, Brock Lesnar and Ron Waterman haven't made TV. Shelton Benjamin has, and he's very athletic in the ring already, but you can only expect so much of a guy who has only been wrestling in front of a crowd for several weeks. From the clips, after they had all the WWF guys and the Fabs and Jackie Fargo in at the last Louisville Gardens show, which drew about 2,600 paid, the return to the Louisville Gardens with Crash Holly and Big Boss Man as the headliners drew a very sparse-looking crowd. Expect a lot more done with the Midian Streaker character. There is talk of linking Raven up with Kane as kind of his mentor and the reason he turned back heel. Noreen Greenwald Mona, has been talked about as a member of the RTC wearing long gowns with no cleavage as sort of the antithesis of the rest of the women, which probably will set up a feud with Lita. The RTC angle is an almost duplicate of an angle Roller Jam is doing, and since they tape months in advance, I guess they did it first, with the heel moral authority against the face women teasing blowjobs as the oral authority. It looks like Dynamite Kid will appear at the WWF pay-per-view show in the UK in September since Sheffield is only 30 minutes from where he lives. Terry wearing an orange dress on SmackDown last week was, in fact, a very subtle ribbit Taz since orange is supposed to be his color. Taz spoke with Lisa Marie Varon, Victoria the Hoe, of her wearing orange and it led to people ribbing him on it. Taz is seemingly the brunt of everyone's jokes these days. It appears, as we figured, it would never let him get over due to his size in his ECW role as a tough guy or a killer or a guy that throws everyone around. They want him to do a 180 and play the underdog role of a guy who sells like crazy but never gives up, similar to that angle they did with him early in his tenure with Bossman and Albert when they wound pound him to death and keep coming back for more pounding. John Madden was asked about the XFL on the US Open and said he thought it would make it because they had two smart people heading it up in Vince McMahon and Dick Ebersol and they have NBC. Some people say, who's going to watch it? Who watches wrestling? There are a heck of a lot of people who watch that, not that this XFL is going to be wrestling. They're not going up against the NFL or college football. I think the thing not only has a chance, I think it has a real good chance. In the Sports Rec video charts, WWF had the top 5 and 8 of the top 10. The tables, ladders and chairs videos featuring matches of Can, Dudleys and Hardys rose to number 1 in its second week on the chart, replacing The Rock. The Divas, Postcards from the Caribbean placed third. With the TLC and Divas videos getting big promotional pushes on TV this week, along with the release of the Mania video, they should be topping the charts for a while. The latest Austin video was number 4. XPW's second video called Extreme Wrestling was number 10, and its first video was number 15, and I think that may be chalked up to confusion in the marketplace from people thinking they are ECW videos, while the ICP Yuggalo video was number 12. WWF has 13 of the top 20. The China autobiography isn't scheduled for release until January. In the UK for August 27th to 28th, SummerSlam drew 340,000 viewers, tremendous since it started at 1 a.m., Raw had 320,000, SmackDown had 120,000, Metal had 80,000 and Livewire had 50,000. Nitro had 70,000 and Thunder had 40,000. SmackDown tapings on August 29th in Fayetteville, North Carolina drew a sellout 8,040 paying $233,660. House show on September 2nd at the Fleet Center in Boston drew 13,640 paying $402,467. House show on September 3rd in Knoxville drew 7,281 paying $229,105. Raw in Lexington, Kentucky at Rupp Arena drew 9,715 paying $319,002. Merchandise for the week was $344,819 or $8.92 per head, which is a higher than usual weekly figure with the Boston fans particularly strong. The Boston and Knoxville house shows were pretty much identical as far as results. The main matches were Undertaker and Rikishi over Benoit and Kane when Undertaker pinned Benoit after a choke slam, and then after the match, Kane also choke slammed Benoit. Main event was a three-way with Rock over Jericho and Triple H. Triple H got a big babyface pop in Boston but was able to turn himself heel. Benoit came out and attacked Rock, but Jericho saved Rock and he and Benoit brawled to the back, leaving just Rock versus Triple H, and Rock scored the clean pin with the people's elbow. In Boston, Nomar Garciaparra of the Red Sox was at the show and invited to dance with Too Cool, and also invited back into the ring after the finish of the main event to do a routine where The Rock asked him what kind of pie he liked. Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,